At a time the world is riding on the global economic storm, Nigeria's economy continues to grow relatively strong. The International Monetary Fund advises Nigeria to rebuild its excess crude account to be able to sustain the country's economic strength. Now, CNBC Africa's Umu Ibrahim caught up with Scott Rogers, IMF senior resident representative, to discuss underlying potential for the Nigerian economy.
We think that the potential for intra-regional trade is substantial and would certainly provide the region with an important kind of safety valve for economic downturns outside of Africa. The potential is so great because there's so little of it now. But even today, with the current linkages, a great many of the African economies are relatively insulated from what's going on in Europe and other industrialized countries. But increasing these intra-regional trade linkages would give them that much more of a safety buffer. This is one of the things we're seeing in East Asian countries, where over the years they have done more and more trade among themselves, and it's provided them with a similar buffer.
There is very little value added to goods exported out of Africa for a variety of reasons, including the state of infrastructure on the continent. However, governments in Africa are beginning to address this. Now, your views on the opportunity for African countries to grow exports if it gets infrastructure right?
I think the potential, again, is substantial. There's no question almost every African nation outside of the middle-income countries are facing substantial infrastructure challenges in roads and power and water, but also social infrastructure as well. Things like, you can include security and other aspects as well. There are two roles for government to play here. I think one of them is getting a little more attention as it should, and that's not using government as the builder of infrastructure necessarily, but creating an environment where the private sector will take it upon itself to do. As a general rule, the government need focus only on infrastructure for which it wants universal free access, such as public education, public roads, things like that. But if it's infrastructure where you plan to charge a user fee for that would cover the costs, and you can do this in power and water, in toll roads and ports, focusing on creating the environment to bring private investors in would be a much, you get much more money coming in, much greater potential for expansion of the infrastructure. So it's really getting government to both focus on spending on what it wants for public access infrastructure, and then focus on creating a good environment to leverage private sector investment in the rest of the infrastructure.
Some have said the global economic downturn provides a window of opportunity for Africa to emerge as a global economic giant. Now, your views on the scale of the opportunity open to Africa in this time of crisis?
Well, I think what's become clear over the last 10 or 15 years, and it's really been going on for longer than that, is the world is becoming a much more integrated place. We are far more dependent upon one another for our own economic growth. And I think that brings both opportunities and risks. If you look at the countries that have really transformed their economies since the Second World War, that have really grown rapidly, right, they have done it by taking advantage of global opportunities, by exporting to the richer countries. That's where the value added is. That also means they're at risk of being exposed to those downturns. But that's the nature of high rates of return. High growth come higher risks. And it's just something that has to be balanced and managed. And you need to create the buffers so when the event does arise, you have the potential to respond. That's why we're saying now, especially for the oil exporting countries, is a time to start saving some resources. So when the next crisis comes, and there will always be a next crisis, they will be well positioned to face it and be able to avoid some of the adverse impacts of an economic crisis abroad.
What are the views of the IMF on Nigeria's macroeconomic priorities in this season of global economic crisis? What should we be focusing on as we ride on the global economic storm?
I think that despite the economic weaknesses abroad, Nigeria's position is relatively strong. Oil prices are at record highs, right? Nigeria's oil production is as high as it's ever been. I think what the challenges here are to contain the rate of growth of government spending and start saving for the future. Right? And that saving can include investing in domestic infrastructure, right? And creating assets for future generations, real assets. The Nigerian economy is growing very strongly and has been, and we expect to continue doing so, even with a weakening abroad. But right now, as oil prices are high, right, I think Nigeria should take advantage of this opportunity to rebuild its excess crude account, to continue building international reserves, to reduce domestic borrowing, and to bring inflation down. And if it gets to that situation where it has, where the debt ratios are leveling off, inflation has come down, reserves have been rebuilt, Nigeria will be very well situated for the next crisis.